I'll get on my mark. How's this for a mark? Hey, good evening, everyone. It's just a little bit past 7:15, so we're going to go ahead and get the meeting started, especially for those who are joining us online, and we're going to have some announcements to share as well. So feel free to join us and come on in. All right, I guess we're all rolling and everything. Hey, everyone, welcome to the December meeting of the Madison Astronomical Society. I'm the president of the society, Lawrence Moore, and it's great. We've got lots of people here at Space Place, and we've got a lot of different telescopes. And we're also, for those of us, if you're joining us online and you want to learn about buying a new telescope, tonight's the night to join us, and we have a speaker, John Wunderlin, who's going to be giving a presentation at 7:30. So before then, well, we just have a few announcements to get through. First of all, it was kind of unfortunate news. I have to announce that our longtime board member, Chris Zeltner, is going to leave the board immediately. She's got some personal business that she's got to deal with the next few months, and it's unfortunate, but she doesn't have enough time to devote to the board at this time. So yeah, we have enough people to have a functioning board, which is good, but at our next meeting we're gonna figure out a way to fill the empty board seat. So hey, and if there are any of you out there who would be interested in maybe helping with the board, Chris is vacating an app board seat, so feel free to contact me by email if you're interested in helping out. So, yeah, and I would, at this point, I'd really like to say, Chris has really had she's a longtime member of Madison Astronomical Society and very knowledgeable in the hobby, and her contributions and points of view that she shared with the board have just been really valuable. So yeah, we're really sorry to see her go. Dan?
I was just going to add, we have another vacancy coming in the spring. Charles is going to step down.
And also Charles, and the other at-large board member, Charles Coles, also has to step down because he's also got personal business. He is pursuing his law degree, so.
So if you want to serve on a board.
Yeah, there'll be opportunities coming up. Oh, probably my phone, thank you. Yeah, I've got my phone hanging by my belt over here, so it's a good thing to have the radio transmitter away from that. Also, I'm trying to think, we have another presentation coming up here. If beyond tonight's clinic on telescopes, if you'd like to attend another astronomy-related lecture, this Tuesday at this very place at Space Place from 7 to 8 o'clock, we've got a presentation, Under Pressure, Pushing Down on Galaxies, presented by Melissa Morris of the UW-Madison Astronomy Department. And this is a synopsis. Our universe is filled with billions of galaxies that are all interacting with their surroundings in some way. But how do these interactions affect how galaxies change and evolve over time? Can we use supermassive black holes that are emitting incredibly high energy jets as tools to study the surroundings of these galaxies? Join us to learn more about the matter that exists outside of galaxies, the effect it has on galaxy evolution, and how supermassive black holes can help. That sounds very interesting, and that'll be right here Tuesday at 7 o'clock.
Also on YouTube.
And it'll also be on YouTube. Also coming up at the Madison Metropolitan School District Planetarium, they're having their annual holiday presentation entitled Seasons of Light, Finding Inspiration in the Darkest of Seasons. And this is what it's about. For those living in the Northern Hemisphere in the winter months, the months are time associated with the struggle against the darkness. In this program, we'll explore the seasons as well as the traditions across many cultures that are associated with the season of light in the darkness. As always, we'll explore astronomy concepts along the way and explore the current night sky. And they'll be giving presentations that you have to get $2.50 tickets for online on Monday, December 19th through Tuesday, December 20th. And those will run from, I guess, depending on which day you go, it'll be, they've got a Monday presentation at 7:30 and the Tuesday presentations at 6 o'clock and 7:30. Next month, right here, we'll be having our January meeting of the Madison Astronomical Society, and we will have 2 mini talks featured, and we will have 2 experts in astrophotography joining us over Zoom, and then we'll be able to view them on Zoom through the projector here, and then people joining us on our YouTube channel will be able to join us on that Zoom feed, which won't, the Zoom feed itself, like in the past, will not be open to the public, but this, our usual YouTube stream will be available to everyone. John, would you care to tell us some of the details about that talk, or I could just go through it?
I can just do a quick. So yeah, like Lauren says, next month, we're having 2 speakers. Both of those will be remote, as Lawrence says, so they won't be in the room. They'll be coming in over the internet. But it will be 2 30-minute talks, mini talks, about different aspects of astrophotography. So if you're a telescope person and you want to know how to take pictures, both of these talks will be good introductions to different aspects of how to put that camera on the telescope and get it done. So that'll be next month.
Thank you, John. Does anybody else have any other questions or announcements they'd like to make? Jürgen, I'll come right over to you.
We have calendars and the new John Rummel's History of MAS for sale. We're getting 25 copies more printed of the history, and so I think we have a couple left right now. You're right, that many.
No, I was going to say, put the microphone closer.
Oh, sorry. Okay. How's that? Okay. And we'll be taking orders for those, and they'll be in before Christmas if you want to send them as Christmas presents. I've got all of 6 calendars left. So if anybody wants to buy a calendar, please come, because I'm not going to be here for the whole thing. I've come down with a rather miserable cold, and I don't want to infect everybody, which is why I have a mask on. So, and after I leave, if anybody wants to order a history book, you can talk to John about it, and he'll channel the information to me. So that's it.
Thank you, Jürgen. All right, it was kind of a bummer. We had a big transit this week of Mars hiding behind the moon, and unfortunately, when I got home, I was watching NBC all night, nothing but clouds. And I don't know if anybody here had any better experiences. So I guess John Wunderlin saying that, yeah, just as at the end of the transit where he was observing, the sky cleared enough just to see Mars pop out again. And I was kind of hoping to get out my long focal length telescope and just be able to see Mars surface features just a little bit, and then just see the moon kind of get in the way. It would have been a lot of fun, but.
How long of an event is that? How long?
About an hour.
Yeah, about an hour. I think it got started around 9 o'clock local time.
It disappeared and I was gone for about an hour and then came back out.
I see.
Fortunately, with a nice planet up like Jupiter, you can see interesting and fun transits all the time across the face of Jupiter or behind Jupiter. That's one of my favorite things to see, especially if you get more than one moon going around Jupiter. So, the hazards of living in Wisconsin. Does anybody have any recent observing activity that they'd like to share with the club, or any interesting astronomy-related news that they would like to share? Is there anybody here who's not been to a Madison Astronomical Society meeting before that would like to introduce themselves? Hi there, yes, what's your name?
My name's Jason Pick. I have an 8-inch Dobsonian telescope, and I'm putting a setting circle on the base right now. And I put some LEDs in there and a little container with a circuit to raise up the voltage from the batteries and now I have some pretty powerful light to see the circle at night.
Great.
So, anyway, I've been wanting to come here a while now, and this is the first one. But
Where are you from? Where are you from then?
from Fort Atkinson,
Fort Atkinson. Well, thanks
Yeah.
for joining. Yeah, it's a little bit not too bad of a drive, but
it was all right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and your name, sir?
Well, I'm Jim Pick. I'm his father. And because when I was a youngster in my teens, I was in a rock and roll band that I named the Saturns. And when he showed me on his telescope Saturn, it just blew my mind. I just found it such a neat thing to see. And he's kept me interested somewhat along the way.
Oh, that's really, it's the funny thing about looking at Saturn. The first time people say all the time, "Is that real?" As they're shocked at how ethereal it looks. And I also have to, great pick for a name for a band. I was once in a band called Gibbous about 20 years ago. So. Yes, I'd like to meet you. Do you want to say hi?
I'll say hi. We're here.
On behalf of our son.
Our son, mostly our 15-year-old son who fell asleep on the couch, so he's
Oh,
not
no.
here. A long week of staying up late on the internet for him, and he's really interested in astrophotography, but he's never done anything before. So we're trying to figure out what to get him, maybe for Christmas. We've been interested in having a telescope for a while. We've looked on the internet and have some answers, but also it's very confusing. So we're hoping to get some clarity tonight.
Well, you came on a very good night because our club secretary brought his imaging setup, and I know there's some other people here that are into astrophotography, and we might be able to answer some of your questions and get you pointed in the correct direction. Yeah, Will, there's one of them too. Is there anyone else who would like to introduce themselves? Hi there.
Hi, I'm Ed Oftedal, and I've been interested in astronomy for a long time. I bought a little 4.5-inch Newtonian about 30 years ago and used it for a while, and then it ended up on the shelf in my basement, and I finally dug it out again. But I've been thinking for a long time about joining this club because I live in walking distance of the observatory out on Kelly Road.
Oh, how neat. It's great that you're
So
here
I thought I should take advantage of that.
Yeah, it's it's a nice area up on the hill and away from the city light pollution pretty well. So yeah, it's great to have you here. Thanks for being here.
This is my
Hi,
wife.
I'm Diane Oftedal. Yeah, his wife. We've lived on Kelly Road for 18 years, and we walk by the observatory all the time. We're always like, we're going to join that one of these years.
Yeah.
And 18 years went by, and finally.
Well, it's great to see you. Yeah, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming here. And I'm looking at the clock. I think we have time. Is anybody else new here that would like to say hi? Well, yes, great.
I'm Leah Napawaki. I'm a second-year student at UW-Madison, and I'm the treasurer of the Astronomy Club there.
Thanks for being here. It's nice to see you. And sitting next to you is our person that's been a member of the club for a while, Will, who's Will's done a really good job of getting an astronomy club going at UW-Madison. So it's great to have you guys here. Thanks for being here. Well, all right. I think we are ready for this evening's guest presentation. John, would you like to introduce our speaker?
Thank you, Lawrence. So we do this meeting every December. We call it the annual Telescope Clinic. And the point of the meeting is to hopefully attract a few people who are in the, I'm thinking about making a purchase stage, but I don't know what to buy, or I've got this telescope and I really don't understand, exactly how to use it. I need somebody to help me kick the tires. And so I'm happy that we have a few of you here tonight. So to prime the pump for what's going to happen after the presentation, if you are here tonight with questions, just quickly raise your hand. Okay, everybody spot those people. Club members, if you are here tonight and you can potentially answer those questions, raise your hand. So look around and identify those people now, and we hope to see you guys come together after the meeting. We have several members who have brought their own telescopes. They're set up around the room. A variety of telescope types are represented. And we have a couple of the Space Place telescopes from the back room filling out the brand. So we've got pretty much every major type of telescope represented. So if you've got a question and we don't want to just wave our hands and have you imagine things, we can actually walk over to a telescope and say, this is what I'm talking about, this is what you're looking for. So before we get to that part of the meeting though, John Wunderlin is a member of this club. He's also a founding member of the Iowa County Astronomers just down the road. John is going to give a talk that you can see is aimed right at what our topic is tonight. What are some things that you need to be thinking about if you're thinking about buying a telescope? John's presentation is going to last around 20 to 30 minutes. He's going to do some Q&A from the podium, from up here, and then John will kind of transition us to the next phase where we'll just have conversations around the room. And we've got a few snacks at the back table so we can kind of get into the festive part of the holiday party end of this. So without any further ado, John Wunderlin, take over. Nice to have you tonight. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Around here, you can just call any of us John, and you'll be right most of the time. So when that John asked me about presenting this talk, it occurred to me that my personal journey through amateur astronomy might be a good way to both share information and tell a story. Whether that's a cautionary tale or an action-adventure novel, you'll have to decide. My earliest memory was when I was 5 years old. I was playing at my neighbor's house, and she said I needed to get home to see the TV show. I arrived as my family was gathered around the TV in our family room, watching a grainy black and white video of a man walking backwards down from a ladder. And of course, this was Neil Armstrong's first steps on the moon. I was 5 years old. The moon program helped shape my lifelong love of science and astronomy. When I was 10 years old, my father won a telescope as a sales prize. It had very cheap optics and was a terrible mount. After struggling with the mount for what seemed like hours, but was probably more like 30 minutes, I managed to get it pointed at the brightest object in the sky. I was confused, though. I was expecting a bright star, but instead what I saw, after focusing as well as I could, was a crescent shape. That was the only thing I looked at that first night, and I went to bed thinking I had a junk telescope, which of course I did. But it was actually displaying a proper image of something. Can anyone guess what I saw? Venus is right. My frustration with that first scope definitely dampened my spirits, in spite of eventually realizing what it actually showed me was my first view of Venus. That telescope is very similar to what you can often buy at Walmart or other retail stores. A tiny telescope on a shaky mount, which is virtually unusable by beginners or even advanced astronomers. Some things to watch out for if you were ever tempted to buy a telescope at a department store are signs such as 500 times magnification in big bold letters, or crisp detailed pictures of Jupiter or the Orion Nebula on the box. Don't walk away. In my teenage years, I had the opportunity to visit some planetariums. One planetarium in particular in Dubuque, Iowa, gave me a memorable show displaying the night sky on a domed roof while reclining in a chair. Learning about the night sky this way was very fun, and luckily in Madison we have our very own planetarium. I want to give a shout out to Ben Sensen in the Madison Metropolitan School District. If you haven't been to a show in their theater, you should make it a point. I also want to give a shout out to the Hayden Planetarium in New York City. If you want to have a real mind-blowing planetarium experience, it doesn't get better than that if you're ever visiting New York. Planetariums will often show the stars, then show the layout of constellations that are currently visible. If you're just starting to think about astronomy as a hobby, a great learning experience is spending some time under the stars, without any electronics or optics except your eyeballs, and something like this. Anybody know what this is? Yes? It's a planisphere. This is a planisphere. So this is this can be purchased for a few dollars. Actually, this one's a little more expensive because it's huge. This is what most planispheres look like. So what this is it shows it's got the dates on the outside and time on the inside. And as you turn it around, it shows you what the night sky currently looks at. It's a good representation of the night sky that you can currently see. And this one has lots of deep sky objects and all the constellations, very useful. Let's see. Oh, and be sure to use a red light when using a planisphere so you don't wreck your night vision. Constellations and asterisms in the sky are fundamental to using telescopes, even computerized telescopes. It's important to know at least a few bright stars in the sky. All right, fast forward my timeline to 1996. I was 31 years old. Does anyone remember the big celestial event that happened that year? What's that? It wasn't Hale-Bopp. You're on the right track though. Yakutaki. In early 1996, my family had recently moved to Mineral Point in southwest Wisconsin, and the news was talking about the comet. I went to a rest area south of Mineral Point, away from the small town lights, to see the comet for myself. The view I saw stunned me from that very dark location. The comet's glowing head was followed by a blue tail stretching nearly halfway across the sky. It was truly awe-inspiring. My astronomy interest was renewed and reinforced. I just had to have a telescope. The junker scope my dad had won had long since been discarded. Learning from my 10-year-old self, I carefully researched my options and spent careful hours considering my purchase. Of course, I'm kidding. The next day I went to Walmart and bought a scope that claimed to be able to see little green men on the moon. This scope had the added benefit of having an equatorial mount. Let me tell you right now, if you're just getting started in this hobby, for Zeus's sake, do not buy an EQ mount as your first scope. Once again, I wrestled with the disappointing beast with crappy optics and terrible motion controls. But I did manage to get it pointed at the comet. That was when I learned the big downside to magnification. Something that stretches across the sky is not something you want to point a telescope at for the most part. It was cool being able to see the nucleus up close, but it was just a fuzzy blob filling the entire eyepiece. The best optics for this particular comet was just your own eyeballs. Rolling along to 2004, this was a big year for me, my 40th birthday. My mother, who was retired in Florida, generously sent me a big fat $1,000 check for my birthday that year. It took me about 1 microsecond to decide what to do with that windfall, a real telescope. This time, having been burned twice with crappy telescopes, I really did research. This time with the internet, which at the time was an incredible source of information, as opposed to today's commercialized cesspool of misinformation and social division, but that's another talk. With the help of some online experts, including Ed Ting, and a website I recently found called cloudynights.com, which is still an incredible source of information for astronomy, I ended up purchasing my first good scope, which to this day is still my most often used scope and one of my best purchases ever, a 10-inch Orion Dobsonian with telescope. And this is my scope right here. In my opinion, a Dobsonian telescope is absolutely the best option for a first scope. With this type of scope, you plop it down on the ground and can immediately start observing, rather than trying to fiddle with a complicated EQ mount or slow motion controls. I was very glad I had a computerized version because it let me see lots of objects very quickly, but a lot of people actually prefer a non-computerized scope and something called star hopping. So there isn't one right answer for which type of scope to get first, other than Dobsonian in my opinion. Obviously, $1,000 is a hefty price, and this scope is even more expensive than that now if you can even get one with the current supply chain issues. You might be able to find a used Dobsonian through Cloudy Nights, Marketplace, Craigslist, or eBay. Of course, buyer beware. It might be a real good idea if you find something on one of these places to run the purchase past one of our club members so that we can inform you if we think it's a reasonable decision or not. Once I got this scope, my real astronomy journey began. Most clear nights you would find me in my backyard seeing as many things as I could. The combination of a 10-inch aperture and fairly dark skies at the edge of Mineral Point, Wisconsin, meant I was able to see lots of targets. A year later, I met Dave Esper, who was doing astronomy classes in Dodgeville, and we became fast friends. In 2006, along with some of his students and other enthusiasts, we formed the Iowa County Astronomers Club, which is still very active to this day under John Hazley's terrific leadership and continues to offer fellowship and outreach for astronomers in southwest Wisconsin. Joining an astronomy club is a great way to learn to have the chance to try equipment before investing a lot of money and to meet a lot of other like-minded folks. Later the same year, Dave, Ron Scratch, and I decided to build an observatory in the country. Dave put an ad in the paper, and eventually we found a farmer west of Mineral Point who was willing to rent us some farmland to let us build an observatory. This was Empire Ranch Observatory. This began my journey into astrophotography. Long exposure astrophotography is a challenging hobby that requires significantly more investment in equipment. And although I just got done mentioning how beginners should not buy an equatorial mount, that is actually the preferred mount for imaging, as it allows for long exposures without image rotation. The running joke, which is mostly true, in astronomy, the three most important things for astrophotography are, number one, the mount, number two, the mount, number three, the mount. This is the one we were using. This is a Losmandy G11. Several years after building this remote observatory, Dave decided to move to Texas, so I worked with Ron and Dave, I bought them out, and I moved the observatory to my backyard. The convenience of a backyard observatory is hard to overstate. Virtually every clear night, I started observing and imaging. Instead of a 40-minute round-trip commute, I now had a 10-second commute. I just walk outside down the stairs, and in a couple of minutes, I could start imaging, because the scope was permanently polar aligned. So I just flipped open the dome, fired up the computer, and I was good to go. Again, though, this can be a very expensive proposition. This observatory and all of the gear inside represented over $15,000 of equipment. I'm going to share with you a few of my images to show my progress in astrophotography over nearly a decade of fairly dedicated work. So this is 2006. This is one of the first astrophotos I ever took. This is the Andromeda Galaxy. You basically can't tell. And you can see the lots of star trails, and I would not be happy with that picture today. 2007, this is the Orion Nebula. Again, pretty fuzzy. 2008, I started getting a feel for how to focus the scope, but it was very challenging. And this is the Leo triplet. And then this is the Pleiades a year later. And I started to get the hang of it about 2010. I'm going to be talking about an invention that I used to figure out how to focus the scope in a little bit. This is called the Bubble Nebula. And then this is, I forget if this is M82 or M81, but I always get them mixed up. Yeah, Bode's Nebula, Bode's Galaxy. And you can actually see a companion galaxy here, which I was pretty proud of. And then this is the Horsehead, of course, pretty distinctive. And this is the Sol Nebula in 2013. And then this is called the Whale Galaxy in 2014. I really like this one. It's a kind of a tough target, and I was pretty happy with that. Oops, I'll show that yet. A few years after we built the observatory, I was following a post on Cloudy Nights about an invention by a Russian astronomer named Pavel Bahtinov, who developed a type of diffraction mask that appeared to make focusing much easier than the trial and error I'd been dealing with great frustration. It appeared to be just a ticket for my focusing problems, and it really was revolutionary. I contacted Jerry Haley from cloudynights.com. We'd never met in person, but I met him on the forum. He had made a prototype mask, and I contacted him and I said, I have a business that we might be able to start selling this over the internet if it's really as good as I think it is. So he sent me a prototype, and I immediately recognized the potential. And I started my company, Spica.com, to bring these masks to market. My business was the first commercial implementation of the Bahtinov mask. It was quite a hit. I also expanded the business into a few other products for astrophotography. About this same time, I had a conversation with a member of the Iowa County Astronomers. We were commiserating about the lack of a desktop app for astronomers that would display essential information, such as the lunar phase, weather conditions, astronomy forecasts, things like that. So I decided to write one myself. I'm a software engineer by trade. So AstroGadgets was born a few months later. So this is a free Windows program. Anybody can get it for free. No gotchas, no ad. So this shows a current view of the sun from NOAA, or from NASA, basically. And if you hover over this, you can see the sunspots. And it also has, there's 6 different wavelengths. So you can explore it in hydrogen alpha and several other types. Shows the sunrise, sunset, current phase of the moon, when it's up, when it's down, when twilight ends and begins, which is very important for us, the current weather forecast, and then these are the 5 visible planets, and the little bar represents when it's up. The yellow means it's up like first thing in the evening, and if it was yellow over here, it would be only up towards dawn. And then this is a clear sky chart, and this is clear outside, and this is a new bar I just added called, it's from NOAA standard weather forecast. And then this shows when the International Space Station will come over. This is supposed to be a aurora, and it shows what the current planetary KP index for possible northern lights. And then this is upcoming meteor showers, and this is showing the Geminids that are coming up in just a week. Let's see. Okay, so this is just a little gadget, and it sits in the corner of your Windows desktop. So the last thing I'd like to share today is my favorite all-time astronomy experience so far, the eclipse of 2017. This is my gear. When I went to this was in Wyoming, and we were primitive camping, so we didn't have any electricity. So I bought solar panels just for this trip, so I could charge up the battery and run the equipment. And I had all of the equipment computerized, and I wrote special scripts so that it was all automated. I didn't have to touch anything because I wanted to experience this myself. So all of these images you're about to see were all done with only my computers, hands off. So this is the partial eclipse, and luckily, thank heavens, there were sunspots, because I used the sunspots to focus. Without those, it would have been a lot harder to dial in my focus. The Bahtinov mask only works on stars. It doesn't work in the daytime. So this is a series of exposures I took from 4 milliseconds up to 4 seconds. And I'll just cycle through them here. With the 4-second exposure, you can actually see the surface detail on the moon, which I didn't know that was going to happen. I was pretty excited about that. And here's a zoom in of the prominences that were visible. You know, and incidentally, all of these pictures, I didn't do any processing on these. These are right out of my camera. It was just an old Canon 350, actually not really anything special other than the telescope it was mounted to. And this is what's called Bailey's beads. And then this was the first image I saw after experiencing the eclipse with my own eyes, and I went into my tent, and the first picture I pulled up and I started crying. So in closing, I just want to say, there are many paths to enjoyment as an astronomer. Computerized versus star hopping, binoculars versus telescopes, solar observing, lunar crater identification, visual versus astrophotography. You can do things called Messier marathons. You can have an observatory. You can view occultations, meteor observing. The sky really is the limit. Thanks, everybody. Want to hit some questions? You want to hit the lights? Great. Yeah.
What language did you write your observing scripts in?
Yeah. Oh.
Fancy. What language did you write your scripts in?
It was actually VB script. It was just it wasn't so much a language as special scripts, and I used oh man, it's been so long now. Craig Stark's software. Somebody help me out. Nebulosity. I used Nebulosity, and he has script capability. So I actually rehearsed at home for about 60 hours before the eclipse because I wanted to make sure it was going to work. So I was so excited that it worked. I was overwhelmed. It was pretty awesome. And I spent so much time the night before dialing in my my polar alignment, because if the polar alignment wasn't perfect, the eclipse lasted for like 2.5 hours from the beginning. And I also did a YouTube video of the very beginning of the eclipse all the way to the very final moment of the eclipse. And the scope had to stay locked in that entire time. And it mostly did. I had to tweak it like twice during I think it was a 3-hour period. So I was pretty happy with that. That was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun. Other questions? Jim.
How many telescopes do you have?
I'm down. The question was, how many telescopes do I have? I'm down to only 7 right now. Yeah, my name's John Wunderlin, and I have a problem.
I've said when it comes to observing and even astrophotography, telescopes are a bit like golf clubs sometimes.
Right. Can never have too many.
Or where you have, certain telescopes for certain
right.
Purposes,
Yeah.
and you can't just get one.
Yeah.
I mean, the first telescope I got was like a 6-inch refractor, but then when you try looking at something like Andromeda, you realize, I need a lot less focal length, so you get a really small refractor.
Right.
And then,
Yeah. And this is still, I use the scope constantly. This is still my favorite scope.
I'm curious, you have 7 telescopes. How many eyepieces do you have? I mean, it seems
not that many.
Because normally what people do is splurge on eyepieces and turn them over really quickly. So I'm just curious.
So so my story on my eyepieces, I didn't bring them tonight, but I used to have a pretty good collection of eyepieces, and then I went to the Iowa Star Party one year, and somebody had this exact scope, but they had an Ethos eyepiece in it with a paracord, and he showed me the view through there. And before I looked, he said, "This is going to be a very expensive view." And I looked through that, and I was like, "Oh my God!" So now I actually just use 2 eyepieces primarily. I only have 3. So I've got 2 Ethos eyepieces and 1 very wide field. That's actually all I use right now.
Which ethos?
What's that?
Which ethos do you have?
I've got a 13 and the big gun, I think it's 25, 26. Yeah, and I do have a pretty good the doubler, Barlow. Thank you. I haven't given one of these talks in a while. I'm forgetting all my terminology. Yeah.
You
Just wait for the mic there.
I'm just wondering, some of the pictures that you've shown were taken with this telescope here?
None of them were taken with this scope. It was mostly the scope in the back there. That is the, I guess I didn't show a picture of my actual.
Oh, you
that,
did. No, you did.
Did I? Okay. That's my. That's very similar to the scope that I use for all my astrophotography. And I still have that in a closet, but I hardly ever use it anymore. Since I moved to Madison, I don't have an Once you have an observatory, setting up for an hour and tearing down for an hour is it's tough. So I don't do. I only do it for very special events anymore.
How much time do you spend when you go out for an evening?
Mostly, so the question is, how much time do I spend when I go out on a typical evening? When I was doing all of that astrophotography, I had my observatory set so that it was mostly hands-off, and I actually wrote some more software. I had something called a cloud sensor. So what I would do is I would set up, I would figure out what objects would be coming through the dome on a given night that would, maximize my tracking. And then I'd start imaging that object and let it run all night long. And if clouds happen to come up, my cloud sensor would be alerted, and I wrote software that actually called my phone and woke me up. So I'd go shut the dome so I wouldn't wreck my equipment. So a lot of the times I didn't spend. It would take me about 10, 15 minutes to get it set up to do this, and then I'd go inside and watch TV.
Why would it wreck your equipment? What would happen?
If it rained.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The clouds didn't hurt anything, but when it clouds up, there's a good chance it's going to rain. So that was, not to mention, and with my tracking, so I do something called auto guiding, and for auto guiding, it locks onto a star, and then the computer makes these little micro adjustments, and as soon as it clouds up, it loses it, so it wrecks the thing anyway.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. One more.
I really only heard most of the end of it because I was talking to somebody. But I was curious, you mentioned I think you said you had a Nikon camera that you took some of the pictures with?
It was a Canon.
Yeah, Canon, sorry, the theological.
Yeah. Not start religious wars.
No. But I'm curious what, for most of your astrophotography, is that what you use, or do you have, you have a dedicated camera for it? I mean, astrophotography camera.
Yes, I have an it's a great question. I have an astrophotography camera. I have an SBIG ST8300, which was the 8300 chip was kind of the golden child for quite a while when I was doing this. And I still have that camera. So so the quick story on this camera. So when I got that, I was telling, I'm also a professional musician, and I was telling one of my musician friends about this new camera I bought. And I was all excited about it, and he said, "Oh, so how many pixels is it?" And I was like, "A little under 2." And he was like, "What?" And I said, "Oh, and it's black and white only." And he's like, "And it weighs about 7 pounds." He's really scratching his head, and it was about $3,000. And he's like, "What?" But most of those really good pictures I took were all with that camera. Yeah, Mike? That's right, I'll repeat it.
Yeah, so how much impact does the camera have? I mean, people can't spend $3,000.
Right.
Is there a huge range between?
Yeah, so the question is, how much impact does the camera have, and basically, is there something you can get for less than that, right? You can, it's all on a scale. The big advantage of that camera is it does something called cooling. It has this refrigerator chip on it that when you image astrophotography, your worst enemy is noise, thermal noise, heat, basically. And so this thing cooled the camera down. I think it was 50 degrees C below ambient temperature, so it got really, really cold. So when I would take exposures, it wouldn't have any thermal noise. And then when you do all of the stacking, and then you can expand it, and you can get a lot of the great detail without noise. But you can do really good things with just a regular DSLR camera, especially the new ones. The new cameras today are amazing. I'm sure I've been out of astrophotography now since I moved to Madison for 8 years for the most part. But I imagine, I'm sure somebody else can talk to the new cameras that are out today that you could do some great things with probably not that much money.
Yeah, and one of the things you can do with the off-the-shelf DSLR cameras is you can get them modified so that they don't, like if you remember that bubble nebula, a beautiful red nebula that's emitting what we call hydrogen alpha. And unfortunately, an off-the-shelf DSLR camera, in order to make white images not look too pink, they cut out a certain region of the spectrum that happens to be where hydrogen alpha emits. So sometimes when you get into using a DSLR camera, after a while you wind up going for one that's got a modified infrared UV cut-off filter on it, so that it'll allow that H-alpha, that hydrogen alpha light to pass through your filter rather than being blocked. Because that's one of the things about DSLR cameras. If you don't have a filter on there to cut off UV and infrared, you get like bloated. Things get kind of bloated, especially stars. Yep. So that it's kind of important to have some sort of filter there. Unfortunately, the off-the-shelf cameras tend to block the hydrogen emissions if you like looking at those bright red nebula.
Yeah.
But if you're a beginner, you really don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, no, you can do so many things. I mean, there's so many targets up there that are friendly. The Orion, you can spend a lot of time on just the Orion Nebula, which is friendly to everything because it's so bright. So, also, I was just going to mention there are still. I've been out of the equipment area for a while, but I assume there are still some reasonably priced cooled cameras that you can get. They're not quite as sophisticated. They're not quite as sophisticated as what I had, but yeah, for about $500, you can get something that still works pretty well. Yeah. I'm sure other people can talk to that.
And I think you might be able to find some one-shot color cameras that are also cooled, that are dedicated type astronomy types. If you don't want to go through the whole filter wheel black and white angle, you can find nice one-shot color gear too.
Yeah, that adds a lot of expense, doesn't it?
Yeah. But the most expensive thing in cooled cameras, at least again it used to be, is regulation, which means it's helpful to hold the cameras, the temperature of the camera at a certain level, because if it goes up or down, then the noise changes. And after you take your images, you do something called dark subtraction. And if the temperature has changed, the dark subtraction doesn't work as well. So that's probably outside the scope of this. But
join us next month for those
I'm
types
sure they'll be
of
talking
topics.
about that. Yeah.
I want to continue the Q&A, but I'm going to recommend that we transition now from, instead of just sort of directing things at John up front, John will continue to be available, but I'm going to invite everybody to sort of stand up and start mingling and break off into groups, identify those MAS members who might be able to help you answer your questions, and let's just get that conversation started as well as the snacks. Great. So feel free to join us in the room.
Thanks, John.
That's a good idea, Jim. Just for purposes of different types of telescopes, John's got a good example of what's called a Dobsonian telescope, and you heard John's recommendation that this is probably one of the best scopes for a beginner because pointing it is literally as easy as grabbing it and wrestling it in whatever direction you want. The disadvantage is this telescope will not track the sky, so you have to keep on adjusting as the moon moves because of the Earth's rotation. This is a Schmidt-Cassegrain, slightly more expensive, but a telescope that's got a great deal more capability. It does have tracking. A lot of people buy these telescopes if they want to get into astrophotography because they're good for both visual use and for attaching a camera. In the back of the room, Tom, in the hat back there, has a refractor, pretty high quality refractor telescope. That's the third major type of telescope. And then there are a variety of other ones in the room, including a Dan back with the big rig with the photography, the Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope back there. So all of these telescopes are for your Q&A. This one has been donated to Space Place specifically because the owner is looking to sell it. So if you're interested in possibly purchasing, I'll hook you up with Jim. Any of us could answer questions about the telescope in general, but Jim knows the owner. Okay, have fun. Nice job, John.